This one, I think, this is going to be, Clay, where you see this will be talked about on the right, and the Democrat-aligned corporate media is going to essentially report on this like it's, who won the prized goat at the state fair. Like, just, we're just reporting on it. We're going to just pass this. Not a big deal. Nothing to see here. Big in terms of length. Long story, New York Times. Hunter Biden paid tax bill, but broad federal investigation continues. The Justice Department inquiry into the business dealings of the president's son remained active, with a grand jury seeking information about payments from around the world. Now, this is really interesting. People familiar with the investigation said prosecutors had examined emails between Mr. Biden, Mr. Archer, and others about Burisma. Remember that, everybody?
Oh, yeah.
And other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appear to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. The email and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. Okay, now, here's the thing, Clay. I know, and everyone listening to this has known all along that the emails, the Hunter Biden laptop, was real. But that the New York Times, the flagship lib paper, has now had to concede over a year, going on a year and a half after this whole controversy came out right before an election. I mean, there's so much. There's let's maybe actually talk about the corruption of the Biden selling influence situation. But then there's also, how does the media ever regain credibility when they clearly, with the collusion, dare I say, of social media, suppressed this story, pretended that they were morons just so they could avoid telling the truth right before an election?
There is so much here, Buck. To me, everyone wants to talk about disinformation and misinformation. The biggest collusion that has ever occurred in the history of the American presidency in any of our lives, presidential election, occurred in the fall of 2020. Remember what happened when this story came out, Buck? The New York Post was locked. Its account was locked by Twitter. Jen Psaki, who is now the press secretary, came out along with many other national security advisors to say that this could be Russian disinformation. Also, you've got everyone not allowing that story to be shared. If I remember correctly, Kayleigh McEnany, at the time the press secretary for Donald Trump, had her Twitter account locked for sharing this story. And now, 18 months after the New York Post, which deserves immense credit for having the ability to get this done, now 18 months after that happened, was suddenly, amazingly, all of these news outlets are now going to report what anyone with a functional brain who had been reading this would have known, based on the pictures, based on the details, based on the specificity of everything that was found in this laptop. It would have been impossible to fake. And remember, Maggie Haberman, who has been at the New York Times going after Donald Trump for a long time, tweeted this morning, a deep dive into the Hunter Biden investigation, including the emails released in late 2020, characterized as possible Russian disinformation by some, were authentic. So, Buck, this swung the election, okay? There was a lot of talk about 2016 and everything that happened surrounding the Russian influence in that election. And when you actually break it down, it was very minimal, hardly any dollars spent on Facebook ads in the grand scheme of things. This decision by big tech not to cover the Hunter Biden story, not to cover Biden's potential, certainly it seems, involvement in trying to make money in Ukraine and in China to trade off of his influence. Hunter Biden's clear. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who is a target for all sorts of intelligence-related issues. This guy, based on everything that was inside of his laptop, was an unmitigated disaster for anyone that cares about intelligence-related issues. Big tech companies, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, the Snapchats of the world, they rigged the 2020 election, ensured that the vast majority of the American public didn't know about any of the details included in this story. And as a result, when you look at how close, even by the tally that is out there right now, 40,000 votes, Buck. 40,000 votes change. Donald Trump is reelected in 2020. There is zero doubt in my mind that this was collusion by the big tech companies on the Hunter Biden story, and that by colluding, they changed the outcome of the 2020 election. They put their finger on the scale in a massive way in favor of Joe Biden, and they rigged the election for him based on the way they allowed stories to be covered and not covered.
So there's the putting their hand, which you're describing, Clay, on the scale for Biden from big tech, which really likely delivered the election to him. And when you look at it,
I think it changed the outcome.
I mean, they changed the outcome. And you could say, oh, they're private companies or whatever. Well, actually, there's a lot of regulation, and they work hand in glove with the Biden White House now, and it's not as simple as they're just private companies. Let them do whatever they want. No other private company gets to just do whatever it wants. And here's the other part of it, though. There's actually some really shady stuff. You know, the way that they avoided the Hunter Biden selling influence from his, essentially, you know, obviously from his father, the way that they avoided covering this in the media, and all these CNN anchors or the laptop, remember they always saying unverified, possible Russian disinformation. They put people, including former very senior intelligence folks, you know, used to run the DNI or the CIA director. Some of these people are morons, by the way. I can speak to that in some detail another day. They would say, oh, well, we're not going to deal with the allegations of corruption against the now president's son, then Democrat candidate's son. But here's just from this New York Times piece, because, you know, eventually they got to deal with it. Also, by the way, Clay, the headline they've given this, it's like they're trying to make it boring. That's another note I just want to give you. Hunter Biden paid tax bill, but broad federal investigation continues. It's like, yeah, there's this thing. They're looking at Hunter Biden, but like, you know, we'll tell you about it. But here's from the piece. In some of the emails, Mr. Biden displayed Hunter Biden, a familiarity with FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and a desire to avoid triggering it. In one email in April of 2014, Mr. Biden outlined his vision for working with Burisma, which is a Ukrainian natural gas company, by the way, for those keeping score. In the email, Hunter Biden indicated that the forthcoming announcement of a trip to Ukraine by Vice President Biden, who's referred to in the email as my guy, should be characterized as part of our advice and thinking, but what he will say and do is out of our control. This is Clay, this is influence peddling, full stop. We're here, man. I just happen to be the son of, you know, a really important American political figure, but, you know, no big deal, corrupt Ukrainian natural gas company.
China and Ukraine. Remember, this is part of the story. And by the way, can we just say this is yet another thing that Donald Trump was 100% right about? You remember the 60 Minutes interview with, I believe it was Leslie Visser. Am I right about that? Or maybe it wasn't Leslie Visser.
Stahl?
Leslie Stahl. I think you're right. Anyway, the old woman, one of them that's on 60 Minutes, sitting across from President Trump, and he was asking her on tape why they weren't investigating the Hunter Biden laptop, and she was saying, well, it's not true. And this goes to our point, Buck, which is not only are there many liars involved in the mainstream media, there's also a lot of dumb people who are refusing to take risks. And so 18 months later, we want to talk about lies. You want to talk about disinformation. You want to talk about conspiracy theories. It's amazing how so much of what you and I talk about, so much of what you and I tweet about, months in advance of when it becomes accepted truth. What's the line? Difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth's about 6 months. Well, for the New York Times, it took 18 months. And I just want to read Jen Psaki's tweet here again, because this is a massive story, all right? And I'm curious whether now that the New York Times is saying, oh, it's real, whether now everybody else will chase it, because there's a lot of media companies with egg on their face. And by the way, credit to the New York Post for running this, getting it all right, and being willing to take the slings and arrows associated. But Jen Psaki, who is constantly lecturing America about the need for everyone out there to the tech companies to share info with them and to make sure that they're not sharing misinformation and disinformation. Her tweet is still up, and she tweeted, "Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say." The Russians had nothing to do with this. Hunter Biden was a drug addict who sold influence to China and to Ukraine and probably other countries as well, based on his father. If you read those emails and if you study the story here, Biden is corrupt as a politician can be. The Biden family is everything that the mainstream media spent 5 or 6 years telling you that the Trump family was. They're actually the ones selling influence. Imagine if one of the Trump sons had the laptop that Hunter Biden does. It's a disgrace. Our media is a joke, and they failed the country, and big tech rigged the 2020 election in favor of Joe Biden.
And I think it's important for everyone to recognize big tech doesn't apologize for this. Big tech doesn't say, you know what, we shouldn't have been shutting down the Hunter Biden laptop story before. We shouldn't have been shutting down honest discourse about vaccine mandates or mask policies or anything else. We don't have the absolute truth at our disposal. And short of a violation of law, we shouldn't be putting our hands on the scale. But they're psycho libs, and psycho libs need safe spaces and need to silence the other side because they can't, dare I say, Clay, they can't handle the truth.
Buck, they locked the New York Post Twitter account and refused to allow them to post. They locked the press secretary at the time, Kayleigh McEnany's tweet, for sharing this story. They refused to allow this short story to be shared. If we want to have congressional investigations, and there's lots of talk about congressional investigations. We're on the 964th different hearing, it feels like, associated with January 6th. When the Republicans win back the House, and I hope the Senate, we need a massive investigation into the collusion that existed in big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, and the like, Google, and how they all ended up not allowing a story like this to be shared. New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, I guarantee you there was crosstalk going on at the top of these organizations saying we aren't going to allow this story to be shared. And that is collusion at its essence, and it rigged an election. This New York Times revelation, and I say revelation because it's not accurate to say really it's a revelation, because any of you out there with a functional brain who read this story yourself, I think it's Miranda Devine, Laptop from Hell. We had her on to talk about the book that she wrote entirely about the Hunter Biden laptop. You had to be willing to suspend all usage of your brain to believe that this was not an accurate reflection of the Hunter Biden laptop and emails, because the amount that would have to be changed is so crazy in the details and the photos and everything else. But I just want to reiterate what I said in that opening segment. Republicans are going to take back the House. I hope that Republicans take back the Senate. The purpose of controlling Congress should be to have an investigation about this. If we can spend as long as we are on January 6th, then the fact that there was big tech collusion to ensure that Joe Biden was elected president is a direct attack on our democracy. And Buck, we got all these Democrats out there who always want to, grab their pearls and fall on their fainting couch and complain about how much our democracy is under siege. And they use January 6th as evidence of that. Big tech companies chose the president in 2020 based on the way they allowed Joe Biden to be covered.
And I think there's a fundamental dishonesty that also has to be remembered with those companies. They were built with the promise to their, not just to their customers, which is you, me, everyone who uses social media, but also to regulators and to the government, that they would be platforms for free speech. They openly advocated for themselves as, we believe in free speech. We're essentially going to operate almost like a utility Psych. Now they pick presidents. I mean, that's basically
right.
what the woke left media apparatus has done now. They're just like, oh, yeah, forget about all that. We just want to be powerful and make all the determinations about who wins the presidential election. So got to fight against it, folks.
We're talking about a major acknowledgement that the Hunter Biden laptop was actually real. Oh, yeah, all of you knew that that was true because you actually have functional brains. The New York Post broke the story 18 months ago. But now the New York Times, writing about the Hunter Biden investigation, confirms that all of the emails are real. And this was a question that Donald Trump, chalk up another one that President Trump was right about, was demanding why 60 Minutes was not investigating this. This was Trump with Leslie Stahl. This was his conversation just a couple of weeks, if I remember correctly, before the election. Listen to this.
Take a look at what's going on, Leslie, and then you say how that shouldn't be discussed.
I'm saying...
It's the biggest scandal out there, Leslie.
And you think it's the biggest issue to campaign on?
I think it's one of the biggest scandals I've ever seen, and you don't cover it. You want to talk about...
Well, because it can't be verified.
You want to talk about insignificant things.
I'm telling you.
Of course it can be verified. Excuse me, they found the laptop. Leslie.
It can't be verified.
What can't be verified?
The laptop.
Why do you say that?
Because
even the family hasn't... The family on the laptop, he's gone into hiding. For 5 days, he's gone into hiding.
He's preparing for your debate.
Oh, it's taken him 5 days to prepare? I doubt it.
I feel like that was that all aired originally? I feel like that was some of the full interview because I think they edited that. I remember hearing a different. Am I crazy in thinking that was even more extensive there? She just did the no, we can't verify it the last time around.
Yeah, the Trump people, and I would encourage every Republican that's running for a significant office that's being covered by the media. What Trump did is they recorded that 60-minute interview themselves. Instead of just letting 60 Minutes record what they wanted Trump to be saying and play it as a part of their interview, they recorded the whole thing. And there's so much dishonesty in media now that I would encourage. And by the way, it's not just politicians. If you're listening right now and you're running a company and somebody from the media is going to interview you on a variety of different subjects, I do this. I'll do either live. Hey, you want to have me on live? Boom. Everything that I say goes out. Or I'm recording every single thing that we say. I did this the most recently when the Washington Post tried to blow me up. Of course, they came after me. This was right before the election in 2020. They had to issue corrections on the quotes because I transcribed. I had the entire thing taped, and I had a court stenographer transcribing it. We do it for this show. I don't trust the media, and I wouldn't tell you should, but that's another thing Trump is right. Speaking of not...
Wait. Can we just, one more thing on this, Clay, real quick? Notice how they're willing to pretend that they're really stupid when it serves their needs. I mean, dumber than they actually are in the media. It can't be verified. What does that mean? First of all, you're journalists. It's your job to verify it. Of course it can be verified, and this would be like saying it needs more study. We'll never know the real motives. You know, you've got a guy who has a confession that he makes a video before he goes and, kills somebody. We'll never know the real motive. Maybe he changed his mind afterwards. Maybe he was possessed by a demon. I mean, this is them pretending to be Leslie Stahl, pretending that she's an utter moron because it was before an election and they needed to make this story go away.
And this was around the time that Outkick went to the White House. It was October 20th, 2020 that 60 Minutes interview occurred. We were there right around that same time doing an interview of Trump right outside the Oval Office there. And the amount of lies that he dealt with in the 2020 campaign and the amount of collusion and putting their thumb on the scale from big tech, I mean, really kind of both hands and both feet, you can argue. They basically stood on the scale.